Story 1. He still lived with his ex-girlfriend. She wasn't his ex. He was dating both of us at the same time. But he gave me this big sob story about how he had nowhere to live. Me, being so naive, believed him. Story 2. She kept telling me about her mental illness and started trying to isolate me from my friends. She would talk about all her exes and how abusive they all were. I let it go on too long, and when I finally ended it, she killed herself. I then heard from her friends that I was abusing her and pushed her to suicide. Exactly what she was telling me about her ex, who contacted me afterward and told me all the different ways she abused him. He wanted to reminisce about their relationship with me because he missed and loved her so much. But I had to block him. It was weird. Story 3. My partner of over a year did not reach out to me for 5 days after I had major surgery. My first ever surgery, and one considered to be an amputation. Not a single text. I saw him through the very same surgery years before when we were only college roommates. When I reached out to him while still bedbound and asked why the radio silence, he said he had his own stuff going on with his mental health. Like he always did. I have never felt as lonely as I did in that relationship. I stayed another year and a half before deciding he did not actually care about me specifically. He just wanted the security of a relationship, and I probably could have been replaced by anyone. I will never date someone who is not objectively stoked about it ever again. Story 4. He arrived carrying only a single black rubbish bag filled with his possessions, but claimed that his home had burned down. A little over a year later, he left with a black garbage bag full of his possessions. Therefore, our place must have burned down as well. Story 5. Funny thing about growing up in a chaotic household is that you do not have the ability to identify crazy behavior. Or you do, but you have a very high threshold for what you consider crazy or unacceptable because your baseline for these things is skewed. I let a lot of crazy behavior slide until I truly realized the behaviors I should see as red flags, the type of people I should not associate myself with, and the early signs of a crazy person. Story 6. The biggest red flag is my best friend of 7 years, always using me and taking advantage of me, only caring for herself. It was like a one-sided friendship where she would come to me when she wants comfort, and I would comfort her and make her feel better. The minute she feels better, she hangs up, so it's always about her. She would only call if she wants to talk about herself. She would ask me to hang out only if she doesn't have a ride. If she asks me to hang out, it would be to places that she wants only. She likes anime stuff, so we would go to anime festivals and movies. It was never the places that I wanted to go to. She would never ask me how I'm doing or how I am. Even when my dad had a serious accident, she didn't ask how he is or comfort me. The only thing she said was, "So you can't drive us to that festival anymore?" And then she called me the day of the festival and asked again if I can drive her. I thought she meant us going together, so I said no, I can't. I'm sitting with my dad. She said it will only take 20 minutes, just come and drive me, and then go back to your dad, and then I can call you when I'm done to take me back home. I really don't know how I did not see it. Story 7. Looking back, the biggest red flag I ignored was when my ex would always play the victim, no matter what the situation was. Anytime we had an argument, somehow it would flip around to be about how I hurt them or didn't understand them, even when they were clearly in the wrong. I thought I could help them see things differently or that it was just a phase, but it turned into a pattern that never changed. Definitely wish I hadn't overlooked that one. Story 8. I knew this woman who shot her ex-husband. I started dating her, thinking it must have been a serious mistake on his part, as she didn't go to jail that I knew of. Found out later, after she also pulled a gun on me, that she was completely unpredictable and her ex was completely normal and a respectable individual. Afterwards, I discovered she didn't go to jail because she had political connections, but she was on probation and wasn't legally allowed to have a gun. Story 9. When his sister, supposed best friend, brother, and other people he was close to told me he wasn't a good person. But I stayed anyway. I'm out now. Story 10. Keeping an emotional distance. It is hard to notice when you are smitten, but it is a huge red flag when they keep you at arm's length, yet close enough to not make you feel neglected. Story 11. I watched my ex-wife have a temper tantrum in a parking lot. The car in front of her didn't pull into a spot fast enough for her. I attributed it to her being tired, for years of her being tired. Story 12. I was with my ex for almost 3 years, and because of strange situations, I felt the need to search through his phone. I found a message saved on Snapchat with his girl best friend saying that he wanted to see her naked. I talked with him about it, and he told me that he said that because all his friend group were planning to go to a nudist spa. I believed him and forgave him. Story 13. His whole extended family disliked him and thought he was flaky. He fed me a sob story about how they were all unpleasant. I ate it up. I had so much empathy. No, he's just a flaky, unpleasant person. Story 14. I'm not sure if this fits, but when I reunited with an ex after 8 to 10 years, one of the first things that I told her was that I had become a severe alcoholic. I was the red flag. She still tried and I failed. Story 15. This is a bit different from others here, as it's not about a significant other but about my dad. Around the end of February 2019, my dad and I went to pick up the puppy we had just adopted. It was a bit of a walk from our van to the house, and my dad felt like he couldn't make it. He had been experiencing weakness and fatigue for a few months, which he attributed to getting older, and he kept insisting he was fine. He would keep saying, "I'm fine, don't worry." I believed him at the time. I went and got our puppy myself while he waited in the van. I asked what he was feeling, but he just said he was tired and that he would be fine. The next day, he couldn't stand or walk. I called an ambulance. After 8 hours in the emergency room, it turned out his kidneys had completely failed, and his body was flooded with the waste his kidneys couldn't remove. He required dialysis 3 times weekly for the rest of his life. It was the first of many health problems, resulting from smoking and diabetes, that ultimately took him from us last year. Far too young at 65. Don't ignore the red flags for those you love. Push them to see a doctor. Story 16. They had a crazy ex who wouldn't leave them alone. This is a real thing that happens, and I feel terrible for people who were stalked by an ex. But sometimes, the ex keeps popping up because the person still has feelings or likes attention and is doing things to encourage said ex. Story 17. She loved drinking and drugs. In my mind, I thought she would grow out of it. We were in our late teens. I know she went to jail for cocaine possession. After she was released, she had to move back to our town for a year for her parents to supervise her, even though she was arrested out of state. Maybe it was a federal charge? We reconnected for a few years on Facebook. She had abused drugs and alcohol into her 30s, but finally quit when she had kids. She had a lot of memory problems from the drugs. She even forgot that her next-door neighbor was brutally murdered when we were in high school. She stopped responding to me on Facebook, so I took the hint and unfriended her. She was the love of my life, but she's not that person anymore. Oh well, I still wish her well. Story 18. She would say things like, "It smells like homelessness," in the subway or in her apartment's elevators. And she would constantly point out guys who used to have a crush on her. When they say don't get involved with someone unstable, there is a reason that saying exists universally. Story 19. Not me, but my sister. When I first met her new boyfriend, I asked if he had any kids. Pretty straightforward and normal question. He got really awkward and gave an evasive answer of, "It's complicated." It's not complicated. He just has kids he doesn't see or support. Story 20. Possessive type of guy. He gets jealous most of the time, even when I am just talking to my female friends. He does not want me to talk to other guys, even at work. Story 21. I drove 1,500 miles to meet her family. When I got to their home in super rural Missouri, her brother was being interviewed by producers from the Jerry Springer show because their grandpa, who was 29 years older than them, had stolen his girlfriend. Story 22. My girlfriend and I fought a lot early on. There was a lot of manipulation, threats, and denigration on her part. As a married couple with kids, extracting myself from that situation is much harder. Story 23. He told me some of his exes told him he had no feelings. I thought they must be wrong. Truly, I was kind of right. He did feel things. He felt very strongly that any emotion I was feeling was incorrect and or overblown. This included things like crying too much when my dad died. Happily single now and much more cognizant of behavior I wouldn't tolerate in future relationships. Story 24. Me to my former best friend. Yes, you can bring the kids over to swim today, but I have a telehealth appointment during that time and will be unavailable for 45 minutes. She replied, absolutely. No problem. We will just be out by the pool. 25 minutes into my therapy appointment, she was knocking on all the doors, ringing the doorbell, and calling my phone because her daughter wanted a hair tie. I ended my therapy appointment early because I was so stressed out I was physically nauseous. So many of my therapy appointments revolved around how to help this woman. I spent thousands trying to help her just to ease my own anxiety. Our friendship dissolved instantly when I tried telling her that her drinking was endangering her children. Story 25. He threw an adult tantrum if he did not win at board game night. Oh, and he had to be right all the time. He would kindly remind me that he was right in an argument that he often instigated. Story 26. Told me after we had hooked up multiple times that he had a girlfriend already, then found out he had another girlfriend that he lived with. He was poly, except his idea of poly was, I'm going to sleep with everyone and you cannot get mad. We dated for 4 years. Story 27. My boyfriend would tell me every day how I deserved so much more and now I am too good for him. Then one night while we were out at a bar, he told me that he is not the man that I need. I am too good for him. I proceeded to tell him, nah, don't say that. For another year. Next time a man tells me, I am too good for them, I am putting my running shoes on and running as fast as possible. Story 28. My first boyfriend was 5 years older than me. He and my brother were friends. We started dating when I was 17 and he was 22. And get this, he initially approached my brother about dating me when I was 14. I should have seen those as massive red flags, and my parents should have prevented us from dating. We broke up my senior year. He visited me one day in college where we discussed the possibility of getting back together. He sexually assaulted me that night. I told him I never wanted to see him again. It took me years to admit to myself what had happened and then years of therapy to work through the post-trauma. Years later, I found out he went to prison for possession of child paraphernalia. He lives in a small town between my hometown and where my in-laws live. I used to have panic attacks when we drove through. I am okay now, but I wish I had realized back then what is so clear now. Story 29. I always had a bad, twisting gut feeling about my head coach. My parents forced me to continue with practice, but were never there at practice or meets. I was the perfect victim for him. I still remember telling my parents about him sexually assaulting me, and my mother yelling about how I just made her world more complicated. 10 years with that coach, from ages 7 to 17. Story 30. She turned down jobs because they didn't pay what she thought she was worth. Instead, she spends her entire day hustling for $20. Had she had even a minimum wage job, she would make that $20 in less than 3 hours. Instead, she spends 16 hours working for that $20 bill. The ending was her coming over, asking for my address and finding out she was advertising on an online classified site and she wanted to engage in inappropriate activities for money at my place while I was home. Story 31. The woman I was dating had told me initially she had been married before and had a child. Alright, no big deal. I knew she had one other significant relationship that lasted a few years, but had ended about a year before I came into the picture. A few weeks into us dating, one day she gets all stressed about this legal proceeding involving her second ex. I figured it was something abuse-related, but she nonchalantly mentioned that they had been married as well. She was 33 and had been married and divorced twice in 10 years. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but after she told me she loved me, then reneged after 3 weeks, and then posted online about her new man 2 weeks after we split, I figured I had missed a red flag the size of Texas. Story 32. He wanted to be a police officer. Regrettably, I never wised up. He dumped me. The biggest gift the universe ever gave me was because he has since been arrested for soliciting child sexual abuse material from what turned out to be an undercover Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. Story 33. Lying to me about their nationality, laughing my off. He said he's half Korean. I met his parents, and they were absolutely not Korean. I asked which one was Korean, and he said they were both half. Later in the relationship, I met his grandparents and asked which ones were Korean. He paused and then confessed. Story 34. He didn't have any friends that were in the school we went to. He moved there and started our sophomore year, and by senior year, he only had friends because of me. At first, I thought it was because he was misunderstood and he was shy. No, he ended up being the most abusive boyfriend I had. Story 35. When my ex legitimately considered reconnecting with his childhood best friend who had been arrested and incarcerated for possessing child pornography, I contemplated breaking up with him, especially because he knew my past where I had been groomed by an online predator as a teenager. I told my ex that I wouldn't feel safe if he started associating with that guy again, and he brushed me off. I somehow was able to convince myself that I was just overreacting, but the uncomfortable feeling never completely went away. I started wondering if I was being too unfair because it wasn't just my ex. His whole friend group wanted to reach out to him. They all believed that there was another explanation for his arrest that was more forgivable, like if he received nude images from a girl who lied about being 18. I didn't know for sure either, but I was steadfast that the situation was more sinister and disgusting than that. I only stayed because I was finally able to convince him that it was a bad idea. I should have left the minute he disregarded my feelings,